You're doing a lot of podcasts recently. One that I would love to see you on is, I think Joe Rogan has to have you on.
Yeah.
Would you do that?
Oh, sure I would.
I think Joe, like, besides us, Joe's
I
obviously-
think I'm doing it, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So you are going to do Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I am.
Joe Rogan's the best in the game for sure, and I think...
Well, this is big. So in a recent interview with the Nelk Boys, Donald Trump confirmed that the Trump-Joe Rogan interview will likely be happening before the 2024 election, and it has certainly been a long time coming. We'll see where that goes with the male voters out there. But on the flip side, hilariously enough, Kamala Harris is apparently in such a panic desperation about this that she has requested to do an interview with Joe Rogan as well. We are not making that up. We'll give you that full story here today. But first, folks, please do us a big favor and hit that subscribe button if you are new to the channel. Your subscribing goes a long way in ensuring we can keep bringing you videos like this. And by the way, it's totally free and also a great way to stay up to date with all the breaking news. So please take 1 second, hit that red subscribe button if you are new to the channel. And with that said, take a listen to Trump's recent comments with the Nelk Boys regarding Joe Rogan and this podcast that has seemed like it should have happened for a long time, but apparently now is finally materializing.
You're doing a lot of podcasts recently. One that I would love to see you on is, I think Joe Rogan has to have you on.
Yeah.
Would you do that?
Oh, sure I would.
I think Joe, like, besides us, Joe's
I think
obviously-
I'm doing it, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah. that'd
So
be
you
great.
are going to do Joe Rogan?
Yeah, I am.
Joe Rogan's the best in the game for sure, and I think,
Yeah.
you know,
Did
him
Joe
having-
become so well known because of the UFC? And he does a great job with that, right? What was it that made Joe the best?
during COVID, you know, he was very outspoken on all the corruption going on during COVID. And I think that's personally when I started watching him a lot too. And just, he's an honest guy too, right?
He is.
So I think
Good guy.
good guy. And I think you guys together would just
And he's
be,
got a good voice. That's important.
yeah.
So there it is. In Trump's own words, it looks like this interview will be happening, and it should be great when it comes. Now, some might say that it has always seemed inevitable. I mean, Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast in the world, and he clearly seems to be a Trump supporter, so why would they not put this together? But the issue long has been that Joe Rogan, I don't know if he was skeptical of doing it, or he just got cold feet, or he was just procrastinating about it, but for a while didn't seem like he wanted to have Trump on the podcast. First, he said he didn't want to have political candidates on, which is strange because he did interview Bernie and Tulsi and people like that back in 2020. So deep down, I don't know if for a while maybe Joe Rogan was scared to do it because of the controversy it would cause, although I would argue most of his audience nowadays would love to see Trump on the podcast. But that's why I'm so excited to hear this news, because it did not always seem like it was going to happen.
So when you're having Trump on?
I don't know.
Okay. The look
I don't know. Maybe.
looks like you got something.
Maybe.
Okay, good. That's good. I think that's.
Look, at a certain point in time, it's just like, it would be interesting to hear his perspective on a lot of things. I would like to know, what is it like when you actually get into office? I would like to know things like, what is it like versus perception?
Yeah.
What is it actually like when you get in that building? Like, what are you greeted with? When do you know that people are fucking with you? When do you know that the intelligence agency is lying to you? Like, when you decided to fire Comey, what was the thought? How much did you know? Like, what's the machine like? What is the deep state really like? Really like? Because we have all these, smoky room perceptions, like from the Bill Hicks joke, where they show you the Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. What is the machine that runs this country? Because it's very clear that it's not as simple as elected representatives that are doing the will of the people.
It's funny, if you watch that whole clip, Patrick Bet David basically says to Joe Rogan, yeah, those are all great questions. Why don't you ask him those questions? And Joe is like, well, I don't know. I mean, why are you pushing this so hard? Well, I don't know. It's water under the bridge now. But that's why, again, I'm just saying I'm glad to hear that this likely is going to be happening. Now, there are two key takeaways from what may be literally the biggest podcast in history. Is first and foremost, why is it a big deal? Because it will make major inroads with young male voters. This is something I've long been talking about, which is when we talk about how liberal and far left Gen Z is, and look, they're all voting for the communists. A big reason for that is, first of all, young women who tend to lean very left wing vote in significant significantly higher proportions than young men do. And a lot of the young men out there who, for instance, like Joe Rogan or are kind of involved in a more right-wing or at the very least a counter-cultural identity are just not super engaged in hardcore politics, right? How many frat guys out there, for instance, are actually registered to vote and going to go to the polls on November 5th? Well, hopefully this podcast is kind of a reminder that, hey, you need to show up to vote. Young men who do lean right-wing, and I've long said there's a lot more of those than you realize, need to be tapped in. They need to actually be engaged in the politics, and I believe this podcast will go a long ways in making those inroads. But secondly, another reason I think this is a big deal is because it will also take a battering ram to the legacy media, right? For a long time, there's been this kind of internal war going on between the mainstream networks, this is your CNNs, your Fox Newses, your ABCs, versus independent creators, right? The internet people and what we kind of do here. And when a Joe Rogan, Donald Trump podcast, again, likely becomes one of the biggest interviews in history, that will yet again be another blow to the mainstream cable networks and their ability to influence and manipulate the American people. Because now, thanks to platforms like Joe Rogan's and all the independent internet creators out there, there is now a lot more freedom of information than the establishment would like there to be.
Because there's nothing to watch. Their ratings are horrible. They're cutting him back to 4 days, which is, can you imagine cutting Johnny Carson back to 4 days? That didn't happen.
Now, with all of that said, here's the thing. If you want to argue that I'm overplaying the significance of this, oh, Joe Rogan, Trump wouldn't really be that big of a deal. Yeah, it might be cool. Yeah, it might be kind of funny, but who actually really cares? Well, I'll tell you who clearly does care and clearly does think this is a big deal. Kamala Harris herself, because right after Trump announced on the Nelk podcast he's probably going to be doing it, we got a new report from Reuters that is saying Kamala Harris is considering sitting down with Joe Rogan for an interview, according to multiple sources who spoke with Reuters. Harris campaign officials reportedly met with Rogan's team this week. The development comes as Harris is desperately trying to reach more male voters as she continues to struggle with men, and that is not exactly surprising. Just this week, for example, Tim Walz went on a hunting outing to impress men, which received mixed reviews. By the way, this was that video where he was dressed like Elmer Fudd and was trying to load his own shotgun that he supposedly owns, but didn't know how to do it, right? So again, there you have it. If Joe Rogan was not a big deal, if his platform was not a big deal, clearly Kamala Harris, after hearing that Trump's going to be doing this, would not be scrambling to try, hey, Joe, let me on as well. Can you please do it? So that's pretty funny to see. By the way, it also indicates, I keep saying this every video, but it's just so true, that Kamala Harris must be extremely, extremely desperate, especially with those male voters that she is supposedly struggling with, because doing an interview with Joe Rogan is a serious risk, right? Because Joe Rogan is not exactly the biggest Kamala Harris supporter. This is not guaranteed to be a super softball interview, is it?
The fragility of the human mind, you know, that so everybody forever was like, Kamala Harris is the worst vice president. She's the least popular vice president of all time. And then in a moment in time, all of a sudden she's our solution. She's our hero. Everybody's with her. All these social media posts about her. Try Googling a negative story on her. You won't find one.
So,
ta-da!
Okay, you've got.
Do you think they have her medicated? Because there was a guy that was speculating that some of the things that she says, the way she's sort of disconnected sometimes, and
I don't
she
know
goes
what,
on these rambles, that it's
I don't
indicative of certain anti-anxiety medication. I do not know if this is true. See if you can find that, because really
That
shouldn't
would
say
make
that
s-
about
that would
our
make s-
future president.
Yeah, our future.
So yeah, in my opinion, if you're Kamala Harris, there are two major risks to doing the Joe Rogan podcast. The first is that, obviously, he just completely tears into you. Like, he just stumps you with the questions. He goes off on you. You're walking basically into a trap. And by the way, this is not exactly the type of thing that can be edited, considering they record it, they don't cut it up or whatever. That's number one. But number two is, even if Joe Rogan is typical Joe Rogan, where he's kind of agreeable with the guest, he doesn't go super hard, it's just kind of a friendly, respectful conversation. Even if he gives Kamala Harris that treatment, it will still screw her over. right? Because if you have a side-by-side of Joe Rogan interviews with Trump, who is going to come off as funny and relatable and cool on a podcast that is meant for the bros, versus Kamala Harris, who, no matter what, even if Joe Rogan's like decently respectful, is just going to seem out of place, okay? You know, you're running such a vibes-based campaign, but when it comes to male voters, you want to talk about those vibes, the joy? No, she's actually just incredibly off-putting. And at this point, I don't think there's much she can do to save or rescue that image. A Joe Rogan podcast runs a risk of just putting her even more underwater with young men. But hey, you know what? Like I said, when you're desperate, when they believe they're losing in the polls, when they believe Donald Trump is probably the favorite to win this election, then you got to try anything. That's probably why Kamala all of a sudden, after no interviews for the longest time, wants to do every interview, even Joe Rogan, even Fox News. It's very strange. It indicates, again, a sign of a losing and desperate campaign that is throwing Hail Marys and just hoping they get in the end zone. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Are you looking forward to a Joe Rogan, Donald Trump podcast? Why do you think Kamala is suddenly rushing to do one of her own? Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.